we have Willem-Jan, a legal guy. I'm not going to say from which company you are and who are you in a minute. You can do that yourself, one sentence. Christopher, researcher. Martin, societal impact. And Arne, IBM developer. Each one sentence on your company and who you are. One sentence. You can pick and choose what you want to present.
All right. I'm Arne Rutjes, and I lead a team of blockchain developers in the IBM Client Innovation Center Benelux. And we do a lot of blockchain projects for IBM's clients in Europe and the Netherlands.
Martin. Yeah, you have to share, or I can. You can sort of. This becomes more intimate.
I'm Martin from Fairfood. I run the blockchain program in which we explore the potential of blockchains to eventually make farmers, smallholder farmers, earn more, basically.
Perfect. He's going.
I'm Christopher Brewster. I work for TNO in the data science group. I specialize in semantics and interoperability, and I have an obsession with food and agriculture.
My name is Willem-Jan Smits. I'm a lawyer, and I founded my own law firm, totally focusing on blockchain technology.
You all know me now, so.
Yeah, okay. So we have 3 questions prepared. One, why smart contracts for food integrity? Why should we think about smart contracts and food integrity? And it's shoot and run. So who's got the first? Just throw it in, enlighten us. Why?
Don't. That's the answer at the moment. There are a lot of problems with smart contracts. We have a history of smart contracts going wrong. The DAO was the famous case a couple of years ago, but even last year there were 2 incidents with smart contracts with wallets which went wrong. It's very, very hard at this stage to program a smart contract to the level of integrity and reliability that you can actually, within the conceptual framework that exists for blockchains, launch a smart contract and rely that you have something that works and that will continue to work. So at this stage, don't.
Counterfeiting, who thinks different?
Do. Explore with it, learn from it, fiddle with them, because their self-enforcing nature may make food supply chains more efficient, more transparent, and eventually even more inclusive, we think.
Yeah, fair point. I think I have to agree with both of you. So do start developing on it. Don't deploy it to production just yet. Of course, it depends on how complex you want to make your smart contract. I consider something with just simple status updates, starting from a cow is in the field to the cow is in transit. I consider that a smart contract already. The less lines of code you have, the less error prone it is, and I have to agree that it's more dangerous than normal code, harder to upgrade, for instance, as Nick mentioned. In my team, we usually use permissioned blockchains, making it easier to upgrade the code. That limits it somewhat compared to Ethereum contracts, but still, yeah, you have to be very careful right now.
I think from a legal perspective, it's a nice way to use the technology within the permissioned framework to automate transactions that are easy, simple, and are in large scale available, and it makes it more efficient.
So do.
I
2
also
against
think do.
1. 3 against 1.5.
But don't do it in a public blockchain, please.
Yes, okay. From the crowd, you do have to use the mic.
You're talking about don't do it now, but you suggest there maybe in the future something different when it's safer to deploy a smart contract or something?
Can I comment?
Yeah, hit and run. Don't look for consensus.
There are initiatives to develop tools for it. For instance, a compiler that is based on natural language, which makes it easier, for instance, to transfer legal contracts into code, because most lawyers think in a different language than code. And if those are more reliable, then smart contracting is easier to use, I guess. But that is very, very immature yet.
Well, and on a permissioned network, yeah, please do. Start writing your contracts and deploy them and use them.
Yeah, go practice. Yeah.
Why just on a permissioned network? I'm curious why you say that.
Well, it has to do with the nature of it. On a permissioned network, you have a lot more control. So if something goes horribly wrong, you have ways to correct it. And usually also the participants are known. So you choose a set of companies, for instance, with which you set up a network, meaning that you have ways outside of the blockchain to hold companies or people accountable for their actions. So if someone decides to abuse a smart contract, you know where to find them, and you have other ways of solving your problem.
So you can control your experiments.
Another way of putting it is that you can establish rules of governance in a permissioned blockchain. So you can set up, I'm not talking about smart contracts, you can set up a legal framework to say, this is how we make decisions if we need to change something. And that is possible within a permissioned blockchain. It's much, much more difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much more difficult in an unpermissioned blockchain scenario.
So question number 2. We know a little bit more about smart contracts. What if you have to choose one single trait, one single characteristic of a smart contract? What is the one that you would bring forward? The uniqueness, the beauty, the challenge, the potential, the one thing.
It's a very, very big promise for the future, because if we can get this to work...
But what is the promise?
The promise is that we can automate things a very reliable way with smart contracting.
So it's the conditional transactioning.
Yes, it's the automation that's behind it.
The immutable automation.
Yeah, you can easily automate processes, simple processes with lots of transactions, where trust is needed amongst parties that do not trust themselves. Okay.
One thing.
I say automation.
For me, definitely it is immutability. To rely on the system and to use the potential of not being reliant of a central third trusted party.
Nice.
The beauty of the idea behind smart contracts is really, if you intellectually want to trace its origin, it's the Platonic ideal. It's the idea that we can create perfectly formed abstract shapes. That is the beauty, that is the horror.
Beautiful. Yeah, I would say again, I concur fully, the self-enforcing nature of it. You write it, if you do it well, it's great. You underwrite it and you deploy and it's gone forever. Beautiful.
I just like how simple it is. I mean, it's just code, and it's a trusted way of executing code between several parties, and knowing for sure that if you put something in there, that something is going to come out of it, and it's being stored immutably on the ledger. It's that simple, and that's what I like.
I have a question. I was at the hackathon in Groningen last Sunday. Unfortunately, not the whole track, but I heard something that really makes me a little bit scary at the moment, and that is they want to organize next year the combination and the connections between artificial intelligence and blockchain technology. And which is in fact where I still hear that a lot of people involvement is in the game at the moment. But the next stage they expect will be a real machine-to-machine environment.
Ooh.
If you ain't scared, you don't understand it. I fully agree.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of a general movement that we've seen in society to transfer responsibility away from human beings to automated processes. The way artificial intelligence, or to be more specific, machine learning, deep learning is being used, is again automating processes that used to involve human intervention. For example, we are familiar with applications for loans. In most of Europe, that's done automatically. Now in the US, applications to universities are done in the same way. It is a blind algorithm. Blind, well, it's based on historic data. So if the historic data judges against people of a certain color, or a certain race, or some other feature, it's going to carry on keeping that feature throughout. This is one of the problems with artificial intelligence as it is currently being constructed. So equally, if you're combining artificial intelligence with blockchains and smart contracts, you are dependent on the perfection of that smart contract that was originally written, that would make no mistakes. And if it does contain a mistake, it will retain it forever.
Okay, if people have questions, raise your hands and wink at Kirsten, and then we get you the mic.
The question feels a little bit silly compared to the artificial intelligence threat looming over us. But I just wanted to go back to the question around the wallet that I saw you put up. And we're talking about financial transactions, legal transactions, and cows moving from one location to another location. And it's all sort of in the same smart contract definition. My question, do you need a wallet for smart contracting? And how does that relate to cow tracking?
The way you need a wallet depends totally on the type of blockchain that you implement. But you always need some kind of identifying yourself, not necessarily as who you are as a person, but as the owner of a certain address or an identity on the blockchain. So you could need it for Bitcoin to actually have the ability to move Bitcoin to another wallet. But it could also mean that it's a way of showing that you actually have the ability to move your cow to another field. So some type of identification is always needed, and usually that's done via what's called a wallet with a private public key pair where you are the owner of your private key.
What I showed you is a wallet which you can do transactions with, and I also showed you that it's possible to attach data to it in that field, and that's what's meant by moving cows, that you somehow note the information through a transaction on the blockchain about where that cow is. So if you have a way of measuring that, then you can lock that down in the blockchain through a transaction. It depends on how you implement this. Like if you have sensors in the cow, then you can read those sensors, but you can also have somebody next to the field noting it down and writing it into blockchain.
Got a question regarding the problem of perfect coding. You mentioned it back in the days. You had people writing the block cards. Nowadays, I guess it's a bit more complex than that. How do you see in the future being, yourself tackling that problem of a perfect code, because there is no perfect code, pretty much. So how do you do that? Do you use artificial intelligence? Do you run it yourself in like multiple, versions? I don't know. What's your solution there, or what do you think it could be a solution?
Okay. As you can understand, I think it's very dangerous to use smart contracts. But let's assume that we are using smart contracts. We need to use a whole collection of tools to do this properly. It comes to, in my view, to start with, you have to be very clear about your representation of the world. So you need a very strong set of semantics to be able to describe, or knowledge representation to describe what it is that you're trying to do in the world. Secondly, you need to use reasoning and logic. You need to test your code before deployment in order to check for inconsistencies in the code. And there is a whole range of tools there, ranging from using very, very well-designed programming languages like that developed by Tezos Mikkelsen, as opposed to very badly designed programming languages like the one used for Ethereum, all the way through to best practices, using standardized ways of developing things, patterns. In programming, we talk a lot about using design patterns. All kinds of ways have been developed in the technical literature to make what you develop more consistent and more reliable. But that doesn't give you a final guarantee, because you have things that happen. The world changes, you change your mind, the interpretation of what is needed changes, etc. So in certain narrow areas it can work, particularly if you narrowly define your scope, it will work.
As you said, there is no perfect code. That's the truth. So you can test it and you can do whatever you want, but you better make sure that you have at least some way of fixing it, of upgrading, or some kind of fallback. You need to think of that in advance. That's a hard thing. You need to think of possible migrations later, as we mentioned. And you need to think of, what do I do if there is a mistake? And that means that you have to already build in the ways to fix it later. There is no perfect code. There will never be.
Yeah, and I agree with what these two gentlemen just said. The implementation of smart contracts should be now very limited on just specific processes. And even at the moment, if you do it, you should make really good agreements with the people you use or the parties you use smart contract with. And think about what happens if the program does not do what you intend to do. So to compare it with the normal agreement, the normal legal agreement, if the contract turns out to be different than the party think the agreement was, then those obligations can be elaborated on. That's not possible with smart contracts, so you have to make a legal framework around it to make sure that you can reverse the transactions if the program does not do what you wanted it to do.
I'm going to invest in a smart contract, right? I want some blockchain with some smart contract. What is the minimum development team that I should acquire? Who should be looking at my smart contract conundrum? Who do I need?
Him. Yeah, I think as you said, the definitions, the conditions, the triggers, where do you get your data from that triggers the contract, that should be...
So one researcher?
Or a lawyer, a legal,
him.
Legally trained person.
Oh, not all of them?
Not Christopher, no. Definitely Christopher. Christopher's second, and I think the legal mind first.
First legal. Second research?
I think the coder.
Second Arne?
I absolutely agree with the legal part, because in the projects I'm doing...
He will leave his business card.
And also the business people. In the projects that I'm doing, the technical part is just 10% of the problem. And it's already a challenge, but it's all about the governance of a network, about the extra agreements that you need to make.
Yeah, that's depressing. It always ends up, it really depends on us. So there we go back to this artificial intelligence threat.
I think it's about proving your code up front. And that's a hard job.
We have a question here first.
Yeah, I was just wondering, maybe through smart contracting, but is it possible to put an insurance on smart contracting going wrong?
Yeah, but I think you have a point about that to make.
Find funding for that.
Yeah, sure. But that's a bit beyond the scope, I guess. But of course, if you give someone the objective to write a program for some kind, what should do some kind of thing, and it turns out it does not do it, that's an insurable event. yeah, that's a possibility.
At least to allow funding for experimenting.
Yeah, but I think experimenting can be done on test nets, or it's much more easy than to ensure it. So testing is really important, and it can be done. And on the other hand, if you are just using the technology, then insurance is a possibility. Yes.
I have a question about the international framework of legal developments around blockchain technology and the application of it. I mean, we are an importer of food from all over the world. And how is this legal framework developing?
Is it developing?
Is there a legal framework?
Yeah.
At the moment, no. There's no blockchain law or something. Like there's no internet law as well. Many countries are developing on it, but laws really is always lagging behind. So yeah, we're pioneering on this.
I think we need to give a slightly more complex answer here, which is, first of all, when we talk about smart contracts, as the developers here will confirm, we're really talking currently about very, very simple computer programs. Now, the smart contract term has a certain history. It has a certain history intellectually to do with the idea of merging legal contracts with code, various ways to do that. But the way smart contracts are conceived of in Ethereum, who came up with the term recently, is that those bits of code called smart contracts would have legal force eventually. Now, as my colleague says, there is no legal framework to do that. What is being proposed by a group in London is to use the arbitration framework, the 1958 International Treaty for Arbitration, and write into all smart contracts an arbitration clause which says if something goes wrong, here is the arbitration context in which you will then go and adjudicate the failure of the smart contract. Not the failure of the smart contract, the failure to deliver the goods according to the smart contract. So particularly for your use case of international supply chains and that sort of thing, that would be logically, if we assume smart contracts are working as code, a way of approaching the problem. The vast majority of countries in the world have signed the 1958 Treaty on Arbitration, so that's a pretty standard way of approaching it.
And then there's the notion of code is law. So if the code allows it, then it's possible, and it's the law. That's how it works.
Yeah. Okay, I just first want to see hands who has sort of pressing questions before we have the last quick piece of our program and before we go back to drinks. So who has, like, I have to ask this question today, that's one? Okay, that's it, right? Okay, go.
Nick just mentioned the code is law, and I was just afraid about these legal things. If the legal people put the smart contract, if they put our legal things into smart contract, and legal things are already difficult to understand, and then if they put into smart contract and it's something wrong, and then a majority of people will be dominated by this legal framework and will be more and more exploited by the big players. How do we know that? Because majority of people cannot understand the code, or legal things are already difficult for general people to understand. So
I think the question is clear. Who?
There is no legal basis for stating that code is law, and there's also no way of actually signing up for a way where code is law. There's always the legal framework, and you're free to make arrangements as you like. But even the notion of code as law is a bit outdated already, I think, because in Ethereum, you had these hardcore ideologists who said everything
Not
that
only
happens...
in Ethereum.
Okay, you have them everywhere. Everything that happens has to happen, and then the DAO, hack or the vulnerability happens. So there was a big smart contract, and there was a mistake in the code, and someone made use of that and took all the money. And then actually the Ethereum community decided, okay, maybe not always everything that happens needs to happen. And they made a strange moral choice to go away from the immutable blockchain that there was to correct this thing that we as people apparently found immoral. So that was a very clear way where people abandoned the idea of code as law and actually moved another way and said, well, but we need to be moral about it. Just like with the real law, if a law says something and it turns out to be very bad in real life, then the judge will say, okay, but in this case we'll go around it.
That gives us some more comfort on the future of AI and machines that we influence to some extent.
There's also another thing to this, because if countries are introducing lots of laws to control blockchain, that will not help us to develop it the right way. If you look at the difference between China and here, we are concerned about our privacy. China is not at all, and they are going fast with new technology because they're not hindered by this. So there has to be a balance in how many rules you need to control something. And well, in Bangladesh it's forbidden to trade in cryptocurrencies. I'm pretty sure that the new developments will not take place there.
We're on the move, and the last question for the panel.
My name is Matthias and I have a question about smart contracts. You mentioned, as far as I understand you mentioned that smart contracts are on very early stage right now. When do you think a smart contract will be developed into real life use cases? And what do you think about drag and drop things like Hyperledger does?
In 10 years.
So
Okay,
a long
counterfeiting, 10 years?
I have an example of the use of a smart contract in a real life case
So
right
yesterday.
now. Yeah,
yesterday,
it's already happening.
Yeah.
But tiny.
Yeah, yesterday we're running pilots already with live systems. But it's easy for me because it's permissioned blockchains.
Yeah.
Beta
live.
phases yesterday, and I think fully developed 5 to 10 years.
Christopher, the last time indication.
I think it'll take quite a long time.
That's not good enough. Quite a long
5 to 10
time.
years.
We don't go
and
for
in
that.
the meantime, the regulations will have to change considerably to accommodate the use of the technology.
So how many years?
5 to 10 years.
Great, thanks. Second part of the question? Yeah, the second
was the
part of the
second part
question.
Hyperledger, their work. What do you think about drag and drop solution for smart contract and blockchain, like WordPress? Yeah, just
Yeah.
drag and drop and blockchain
Okay.
smart contract.
Sounds good.
Yes. Where can I get it? Any other counterfeiting? No, we want drag and drop smart contracts. Yes. So we have a lot of Hyperledger fans, I think.
It will come.
Okay. Thank you, panel. We will go to the next very short, sharp ending. Just before that, thank you, panel, very much. They will be